3, 2. So, hello everybody. This is Sparte Live again, and today we are super pleased to have Christian Falsnes here. Hi, Christian.
Hi.
He, um,
And we also want to remind you to sign up to Sarah Oppenheimer's workshop next week. And the deadline for signing up is the Friday 29th, 2 p.m. And so we are really looking forward to your talk and
ready to start.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be able to speak to all of you. I'm a bit sad I couldn't make it to Düsseldorf. I would have loved to do the talk in real life in front of all of you, but I guess we will have to do like this. I must say it's a little bit weird over the past month or so. I have become used to do Zoom meetings and talks all the time. But when you don't see the people you're in front, right now I only see the screen share from my own screen. It's even more weird. So if it seems like I'm a little bit awkward or uncomfortable speaking, then it's just because I feel like I'm sitting alone and talking in front of the computer and I don't see any reactions. So what I thought I would do today was to talk a little bit about my work in general and a little bit about my history, how I started to do art and how my works developed the way they have over the past 10, 15 years or so. And then I would like to show a couple of examples, some videos and some images, and talk a little bit about specific works as well. In my experience with Zoom presentations, it's better not to do back and forth so much. So rather than you asking questions in the middle of me talking, I will try to make some breaks throughout and see if anyone have questions, and otherwise there will be a discussion afterwards. So when I started to do art when I was around 20, 21, 22, something like that, I originally came into art through graffiti. I come from a background that is not very intellectual, not very cultural, and I have never been to a museum throughout my whole childhood. So it was not clear for me that you could go to the art academy or that an artist was something you could become. But I was painting graffiti. I was doing a lot of trains in Copenhagen, where I grew up, and there was a group of other graffiti writers that I started to work with, and we had this idea of expanding the notion of what graffiti could be. So rather than only painting letters, we would start to do more action-based and performative works. We would block the traffic or run into the S train screaming. We would put up posters on the train and stuff like that. And somehow, without knowing that this was a term, I was starting to do performance. And the more I think about it now, the more I see graffiti as the intersection between painting and performance. And painting and performance has been core elements of my practice ever since. And through some of those actions that me and other people were doing at this time, we started to get invitations for festivals and exhibitions and stuff like this. And I started to become interested in performance and the history of performance. And around this time, I moved to Zurich, where I moved into a squatted house, a squatted factory, together with around 60 other artists, where I stayed for 1 or 2 years and traveled around with the group and did performances and exhibitions in squatted houses all around Europe. And then I went to Vienna, where I got accepted into the Art Academy and where I studied for 6 years or something like that. And most of the performances that I did at this time consisted of myself standing in front of an audience and trying to create images or situations that the audience would look at. But at a certain point during my studies, I started to have ideas for performances that would be more complex, that would involve more people, choreographies with 50, 60, 70 people, something like that. I had these ideas. And at the time, it was quite difficult for me to find 50 people who would like to participate in a performance, because I was not able to pay anybody. And most of my friends at the academy were painters and were not interested in participating. So I was really thinking a lot about how do I find a group of 50, 60 people who would like to participate in a performance. And then at some point, I had this idea that I could use the audience. There's already at least 50 people in the room, so why not try to use them as performers and involve them in the performance and do the choreography with them. And then I started to experiment with this, and I quite quickly realized that if you want to involve 50, 100, 200 people in a performance, it's not enough to have an idea for a choreography. You need a strategy of how you approach the people, how you convince them. And quite quickly in my experiments, I found out that the easiest way to involve people, to move people, to mobilize people is to display a high level of authority. So I started to take this role where I would give orders and I would display as much authority as possible through my body language, through my voice, the way I would position myself in the space. I started to study how managers use body language in order to better sell their programs, their products, how politicians speak, all these kind of things. And I quickly realized that I was moving into a very problematic area where it's about submission, hierarchies, and power, very much about power. But at the same time, I felt that there was some really important and really interesting aspects of dealing with this that I had to continue working with. So I did a whole series of different performances where I would lead the audience through different setups and often use the audience as labor to produce my work. So it was on one hand about this display of control, but at the same time also about involving the viewer in a process rather than me doing a performance that people can look at. My idea was to to enable the viewers to have this experience of doing a performance themselves. From my own experience with making art, not only performance, any art, I know that the production process can be a transformative experience. So for me, it felt very significant to try and share that experience somehow. But at the same time, trying to highlight also the problems that arise when you take control and what leadership means. And I started to look a lot at the history of social practices, participatory performances, and I realized that there was a kind of blind spot when you read about a figure like Joseph Beuys, for example. There's this idea that because he incorporates other people, because he mobilizes masses, his art is particularly democratic, or is tearing down hierarchies, or is breaking hierarchies and hierarchical structures. But from my own experience, when I look at works like those of Joseph Beuys, for example, I see an extremely powerful figure at the top of the hierarchy, a white male who uses his power to make other people part of his art. In order to make other people part of your art, you basically need a very high position in the hierarchy. If a random person would go on the street and try to convince people to produce works, it would probably not be very successful. But because of the power you have as an artist, people are invited to come and see you, see your exhibition, see your work. You already have a high degree of authority within the display format of the exhibition, or the system of art, you could say. So I started to explore that quite a bit. I would like to show you one more video. This video is called Male Demeanor as a Consequence of Social Power Relations Between Artist and Audience. The title referred to a work by Marianne Wex, in which she studies the differences between male and female body language in public space. And in this work, which is from 2013, I basically studied all of the performances I have done up to that point, and I tried to see what kind of roles, methods, strategies, formats of authority that I use in my own work in order to take control over the audience. And somehow I came to those 4 different roles. On one hand, the teacher, someone who is explaining something, talking, very much like the situation right now where I'm giving a talk, you could say. On the other hand, the entertainer, someone who is loved by the audience, who is performing, dancing, doing music, these kind of forms of expression that the audience is excited about. And then something like a dictator, where I give orders, where I control the situation, and people have to follow. And then the last, as an aggressor, where I physically and aggressively attack the people and they have to defend themselves. And then I did 4 performances in the same space with the same group of visitors, and recorded a video of each of those performances. I'm going to show them.
and we
Now you have
entered
the rhythm.
our old world, and we were
Now we
drinking
try it.
champagne, and we were celebrating,
movement.
and suddenly we were
And
back
we
in the
say,
starting point, the
1,
art
2,
opening, but
3,
in a completely
1,
transformed
2, 3,
way. 4.
1.
And there's maybe
1.
2 themes in there and back that are important. On one hand, identity. As we already talked about before, identity is not only in my work an important theme, but in a lot of works. And I was starting to think about all the cultural influences that were influencing the way I was thinking about myself and my art, because I realized, or I came to recognize, that I'm not just an artist. I'm a white heterosexual male.
1, 2, one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Up.
And as a white heterosexual male, you're very influenced by a number of heroes, you could say, or a lot of
Just relax.
predefined conceptions that are so strongly embodied in you that you don't even question them. Most of the time, you don't see yourself as a white heterosexual male. You just
Are you
see
still
yourself
ready to be a piece of
as a
art?
person.
Are you still ready? Ah, that's good.
My way around this complex system of references, trying to figure out where my stand would be. That's one of the things that were imminent in there and back. Another thing would be dealing with the audience. We're going to talk a lot more about that tonight.
You feel
but
it?
I wanted to keep on working with the audience. I figured when I do something like this, there's 2 roles.
Keep the tone.
There's the role of the artist and there's the role of
Then
the
all the
audience.
women.
But both roles are equally important.
Get
And
on
both
down
roles
there!
play a very big
Get on
role So I created, for example, another work called
Louder!
The Whole Picture, where I would build a construction with me
Close
inside
your eyes.
and the audience outside. So there would be
Keep the
a
tone.
physical division between me and the audience, and we were divided by this wall. And then through the
Lose yourself.
performance, this wall was torn down by the audience.
Okay, so at this point, I should also just say that the split screen is not part of the work. Normally it's shown on 4 different screens, but this is the easiest way to show a preview of the work. And this might also be a good point to take a little break and ask if anybody has any questions so far.
I think there are no questions in the chat yet.
Okay.
Feel free to, to post
Okay,
anytime.
then I will continue. So I did a whole series of work built up around this principle of me as a kind of leader figure, somehow leading the audience through. Sorry, did you say anything? Okay. But I kind of had the feeling, I started to feel more and more that the works was still very much about me. And what started to happen as well was that as I began to have more and more success with those performances, started to perform in more and more places, and suddenly had my images in magazines and stuff, the power that I was constructing within the works themselves somehow started to become real, because people would go to the performances with very specific expectations, and suddenly I was not anymore this random guy standing up in the room taking control through body language, but the artist Christian Falsnes doing his thing. And I somehow had the feeling that it was important to liberate the works from my own identity, you could say. And the first thing I did in order to break free from this somehow was that I started to work with a performer called Kareth Schaefer, who started to redo all the performances that I had been doing up until that point. So when I got an invitation to show a performance, rather than going myself, I would send Kareth and we would practice and go through one of the performances I had been doing, and then we would do a new version where she would take the control over the audience, just to show, because people started to, one of the main reactions I would get when I showed these works was, it's also just because you are so charismatic, or you are so good at taking control, and you have this presence. And for me, it was never about this mythological performance idea of the strong presence of the artist. It was exactly the opposite. It was somehow trying to show how these ideas of presence, control, authority, and so on are constructed through performativity. So this was one approach. I had to deal with this. And then in 2014, I did a piece called Justified Beliefs. And Justified Beliefs was made for Art Basel, where I had a solo presentation with my Berlin gallery. And it consists of 5 headphones with one audio track in each headphone, all synchronized but different. And each of the audio tracks consists of a voice that gives direction to the person wearing the headphones. So when visitors would put on one of the headphones, a voice would give them instructions for what to do. And then because all of the headphones were synchronized, this kind of social choreography would emerge when people follow the instructions. And of course, because every person is different and every person interprets the directions in a different way, the same setup can have very, very different outcomes. And for me, this was the first time I had the feeling that the main material was really the audience. It was not only about the relation between me and the audience, but about the audience and their experience. And it was also the first time that I made a piece that was not based around an event where people would have to come at 8 o'clock and the performance would take an hour and then they would clap and leave afterwards, but where the piece functioned as an installation that was running throughout the whole exhibition period, in this instance, the art fair. And I was around the booth for long period of hours every day. I was very lucky. There was a cafe near the booth, and for me it was very fascinating to see how the piece as this kind of frame would suddenly be filled by different bodies interpreting the script in a different way. And I also realized that where all the other works that I had been doing up until that point were very much about the collective, the group, the mass of people, this group called the audience, I thought it was very exciting to work with the individual. And that is something that the exhibition format enables, because in theater, cinema, church, you always have an audience, you always have a collective coming and going at the same time. But in the exhibition, everybody come as an individual, everybody can decide where to look, for how long they stay, and when they leave. So I thought it was interesting to do a performance that would be a frame that individual visitors could walk in and out of at every point they wanted to. And that sparked a whole new series of works in my practice. Among other, the work Force, which consists of a white room, a completely white room with a large mirror. And in order to enter the room, you have to put on a black costume. And we had, I think, 25 black costumes, so there could be up to 25 visitors in the installation at the same time. And again, there were speakers in the room giving instruction to the people in the room to do a choreography that they themselves were the only viewers of, because they could see themselves in the mirror. And this work was very much about erasing the individual identities of the people and making them part of this collective body, this big black body that would take different positions in front of the mirror. And the mirror at the same time as a kind of screen. So you could say, in a way, the piece is almost like a painting or a sculpture, where the screen is the display that you see the images through. Another work is Feed, where there is a director and a camera operator present in the room, and the camera is live streaming to a projection in the room. And as soon as someone enters the space, they are immediately approached by the director, who will start to give them instructions of how to relate to and perform in front of the camera. And all the images from the camera are projected live. So you could say that Feed is a video installation, but there's never anything recorded. There's never any edited video that is shown outside of this situation. The only way to see the video piece is to be present in the space and take part in its production. And for me, all these works and other similar works I've been doing were very much about allowing a specific kind of self-reflection, where I mean, everything you show within the context of an exhibition is seen and analyzed, observed in a very specific way. We are used to look at artworks in a very specific way, in a kind of analytical, almost distant mode, where we are aware of the fact that what we see is art and we reflect upon it accordingly. So by making the visitors of the exhibition the main material in the piece, I had this idea that the way you normally analyze an artwork, you would be able to analyze yourself, your own reactions and emotions as well. And that's also one of the reasons why I do these works within the context of art, of the exhibition, of the museum, the gallery, because for me, it's very different from, let's say, classic social experiments where the people that are subjected to the experiment are not aware of the reasoning behind what they are doing, like the Stanford experiment and so on and so forth, where in the case of my work, people always know that it's an artwork, it's a performance, and they are aware of the fact that they themselves choose to participate, and I believe that there can be that this setup enable a form of self-reflection that is difficult to get in any other context. And I was also thinking a lot about the history of performance, where we know all these works that are performed by the artist, where the artist functions as a kind of surrogate for the viewer. The artist go through some extreme or exciting experience, and the viewer watches the artist go through this, and the work is about the body, the identity, the personality of the artist, especially in feminist performance art from the 60s, early pioneering work like Valley Export and Marina Abramovic and so on and so forth. It's a very political decision for them to use themselves and their own bodies as material for the work. But it also, as I say, have this limitation that the artist become the surrogate for the viewer. So what I wanted to achieve, or what I have been trying to do, is instead to make the identity and the body of the viewer the main topic and the main material in the performance, to make it somehow relevant for everybody. And that also means that the work always reflect the public in the way where that in the place where it's shown. Because if I would have to hire performers, to use myself, to cast somebody to do the performance, then my decision of which identity, what body to show, will limit the identification possibilities for the viewer, you could say. But if the viewer themselves become the main performer in the piece, then the piece will always reflect the public in the place it is shown, no matter where in the world it is shown. But at the same time, of course, I'm still very aware of the fact that I, as the artist, have created the overarching structure, and that it's still me setting the frame somehow. So there's still this element of authority, you could say, and it's still about how far do I want to follow a structure that is imposed on me? How far am I willing to follow an authority? But for me, it's if the works would only be about how much can I manipulate the people, how far can I make them want to go, it would quickly become very flat and very boring. Another element, you could say, is an element of freedom, where through creating these frames that allow people to interpret a script or to express themselves within the piece, there's also the sudden opportunity to do something in the museum, in the exhibition, that you would normally never do. So I also give a lot of power back to the visitors by allowing them to take control of the frame that I'm creating. So it's always in this intersection between freedom and control, group and individual, script and interpretation, that the most interesting things happen, I would say. Any questions so far? Okay. Another thing that I started to go into when I developed these pieces were also the questions of what constitutes an artwork, you could say. It's an old question in art, but I have, for me, there has been a lot of interesting considerations coming from dealing with the market of art. I'm always trying to work with the social structure that I'm operating within. So if I'm working in the museum, I try to incorporate all the parameters of the museum. And when I show at fairs and work with commercial galleries, I try to work with that structure as well. And I found that the rituals and the norms surrounding sales and participation in buying and selling art were elements that were interesting to work with. So I've done a whole series of works as well in different ways, dealing with the production, display, and sales of art. One work is Timeline Movement, which is a series of drawings, hand-drawn by myself. And whenever one of these drawings are sold, the buyer of the piece has to make a hand-drawn copy of my drawing and burn the original. So here we see a collector with his purchase that he is burning, and what he in the end gets is his own interpretation of my original drawing. I also developed a series of performance works, one where the owner of the work is allowed to perform the work. So it's basically a performance that the owner can learn how to do and get the right to perform whenever she wants to. I also have a work where the owner of the work gets my telephone number and can call me at any time. And depending on the situation of the call, I will develop a performance on the spot and give the instructions for it over the telephone. And then the owner of the work can perform it in whatever situation he or she is in. So, for example, if they would be at an opening or at a dinner, or if they were at a party, they could call me and say, Christian, I'm standing here together with 20 other people. What should I do? And then depending on the situation, I would improvise a script for that very situation.
We got a question coming in, if that's so fine.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We got a question coming in.
I will read it out. How do you handle your responsibility of consequences of the impact of the participation on a viewer?
So that's a very good question. It's something that I'm basically all the time trying to reconsider and renegotiate with myself and my collaboration partners, and it very much depends on the specific work in question, because the consequences, as you say, are quite different from work to work. But in general, I think, if I should say like one general thing that might not be true for every work, but in most situations, because people are aware that they are entering an artwork, a performance, and I never ever force anybody to stay in the space. So I believe in the responsibility of the viewer as well, and I believe in the decision of the viewer. And every time I show one of these things, at least 1/3 of the people refuse to participate. So I know that a lot of people actively choose not to participate, and that is perfectly fine with me. And that's the freedom I think that everybody have. And if you choose to participate and follow the directions in question, I think that not only I as the artist, but also that individual viewer has responsibility over the consequences as well.
makes sense.
If that,
Yeah, thank you.
that answers the question, we can maybe go
I guess
more
so.
into discussion in the end as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The work that I'm showing here is a series of portraits, also created for an art fair. To the left, you see a self-portrait. In the middle, you see a portrait of my gallerist, Sabine Schmidt. And to the right, you see a portrait of the collector couple, Christina and Stefan Steinbrecher Pfand. So what we would do was, during the opening of the art fair, there was 3 empty frames hanging in the booth. And during the opening, the audience would cut off the clothes of me and my gallerist and create those collage works with the pieces. And then we spent the rest of the fair trying to sell the third work, the portrait of the collector, until we found this couple that were willing to purchase the piece, and then the piece would be produced. So kind of like a commission, where again the audience would, the visitors at the fair would cut off the pieces of their clothes and attach them to the frame. So the works are on one hand about the process, but also about the clothes as the representation of the body, you could say. Here you see the process where my gallerist is standing in the front with her computer, trying to find a work to show to a collector or something like this. And in the back you see some visitor in the process of attaching a piece he has cut off my clothes. And this dealing with the rules and the norms of the art world and the structure that I operate within basically is something that has been a pretty steady component in my work. I was a little bit doubting how much video I should still show. I can see I've already been talking 50 minutes. So maybe to round this off, I would just tell a little bit about what I'm working on right now. As you could see with the work Feet and many other works, one of my interests as well is the relation between performance and video, and more specifically, the performativity of the camera and the performances that all of us do when we are in front of cameras, and the way the presence of cameras influence specific situations. Cameras has always been a part of performance since the pioneering performance in the 60s. There's always been the question of documentation. There's always been video and photo and so on and so forth. And I've been doing, as you have seen tonight as well, a lot of video documentation of performances, video recorded during performances, and so on and so forth. And I have more and more started to think that working directly with the presence of the camera is something I'm interested in. And I've also been starting to work much more with filmic language and how this relation between camera and performance can be explored within a filmic format, you could say. And right now I'm working on a film called Look at Me that will premiere in an exhibition in Copenhagen in August. And we haven't even recorded all the scenes yet, but I have a little teaser here just to give you a little idea of what it's going to be. All right. So thank you very much. I think I will stop here. I hope it was not too awkward. As I said, it was very difficult for me to sit and speak to my screen without seeing anybody. But it was what it was.
It was what it was, and it
Yeah.
will continue later. Now, I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
let's say, let's meet
At
28
8,
or 8,
Yeah.
8:10 maybe.
in the-
8:05. Let's
Yeah.
say 8:05. Okay.
Okay.
And we will post the link in the chat and on Instagram and Facebook, and we are really looking forward to interesting discussion after this talk.
And again, thank you very much
yeah,
for
thank
this
you a
super
lot
nice
for
talk.
this talk.
All right.
Yeah.
See you in a bit.
All right.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.